Okay, folks. Well, we're going to move into the PassiveSolar design component. And Paul Conway, you can introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, my name is Paul Conway, and I'm happy to report that I'm enjoying my second year of retirement after teaching for 36 years, most of which I spent at the Glendale Junior Senior High School in Clinton, Pennsylvania, which is about 20 miles north of Altoona. And in case you're not quite sure where that might be, if you've ever heard of Prince Gallitzin State Park before, anybody ever hear of it? It's one of the largest parks in the state. If you ever have a chance to work your way out that way, it's well worth stopping to see. But our school was located directly across the street from the breast of the dam of the lake, which sounds like a pretty cool place to have a school. But when it's this time of year and a day like today, and you're sitting in the classroom and looking out the window and seeing people out in the lake having a good time, and you're sitting in a classroom, maybe not such a great place to have a school. But that's where I spent most of my career teaching. I taught, it's a small school, I taught all the 8th graders Earth and Space Science. I taught all the 10th graders a half-year required course in environmental science. And then also we had a senior high astronomy elective that I taught. We have a little planetarium at Glendale that I was in charge of. So as Walt was saying about different approaches and all, astronomy is my true love and really ties in very well with the solar aspect of it, as well as the environmental science that I taught. My relationship to Citizen Power is kind of unique. Several years back, Janice was talking, or maybe Titus mentioned, about 1,000 teachers recently have been trained. I was probably among the first 100 teachers that were trained by Citizen Power back in pretty close to their first year of doing these presentations. And I was up at the IU-10 sitting at the first workshop, sort of like you guys are sitting there now. And I know I got to the point where they got to about the third or fourth person standing up there talking, and I'm thinking, wow, this is going to be a long day. But I want to guarantee you that you are going to have a lot of fun here today. We are going to get up and do a lot of things, which you've already done some here already. If you don't really have fun today, come see me afterwards. I'll make sure you get your money back, so we can check on that. Now, today we're going to be talking, my program is going to be about passive solar design, and you're going to be seeing that name, Ron Celentano, here a lot today. Ron is our expert, kind of on retainer with Citizen Power. If there's any questions you have today that one of the 4 of us or 5 of us can't answer, we may refer you to Ron, because Ron is our solar expert. He has a consulting firm down in the Philadelphia area where he deals with all kinds of different solar technologies, and he's really up on a lot of these things. Cute cartoon, but this is definitely very true. There's an awful lot of energy that comes from the sun, and we don't really always realize the full impact of how hot solar energy can be. One of the things that I used to do with my 8th grade students is we talked about surface temperature of the moon. And the surface temperature of the moon during the daytime is somewhere around 220 degrees Fahrenheit. And every now and then I'd have an 8th grade student that was sharp enough to think about that and say, well, wait a minute, if the moon and the Earth are pretty much the same distance away from the sun, why is it that the moon can be 220 degrees and the Earth doesn't get anywhere near that hot? Does anybody know what the key is to that whole thing? Yeah, you should. Right. When we talk about temperature here on the Earth, we're talking about an atmospheric temperature. We're measuring air temperature. So if today is going to get up to 90 degrees, for example, that's the temperature of the air. But when you're talking about the temperature on the moon, you're talking about sticking a thermometer down in the soil and measuring the soil temperature, which during the daytime is going to get up to around 220 degrees. If you think about it, I'm sure you know of instances here on Earth where the soil temperature could be pretty close, if not maybe even exceeding 220 degrees here on Earth. If you've ever been to a beach before on a hot sunny day and you've been walking across that dry sand, you can literally burn your feet on that. Or if you've stepped on blacktop on a hot sunny day, the temperatures, and I think Titus pointed out that he was in Hawaii on a black sand beach where the temperatures were extremely hot, and it was almost impossible to walk across that without some kind of footwear. So definitely the temperatures here on Earth can get to be that hot, and of course the poor bugs crawling around on the concrete there are going to have some problems there. Okay, there's three different types of solar thermal technologies that we're going to be dealing with here today. My PowerPoint today that I'm starting out with is going to be strictly the one highlighted in red there, the PassiveSolar thermal design. A little bit later on today, I will be talking about the solar thermal pool heating and also the medium temperature collectors. And right around lunchtime, Walt's going to be talking to you about the high temperature collectors, which are down here at the bottom. It is kind of interesting to see how nice and attractive a lot of your PassiveSolar technologies can be. And when I was looking through the information, background information, getting ready for this PowerPoint the first time I did it, came across an acronym when they were talking about PassiveSolar design, and astronomers are big on acronyms, so I kind of like that. The acronym was high value, and I'm going to cheat a little bit here and look at my notes, but the H in the high value stands for high energy performance. You certainly get a lot of energy from PassiveSolar design. The I stands for investment. It does cost a little bit of money to put in a PassiveSolar design, but once you have it in there, it does pay back in the long run. The V stands for value, high resale value. If you want to go and sell your property after you have this kind of a PassiveSolar designs put in, it's certainly going to help out there. The A stands for attractive living environment. You can see that right there. That's very attractive looking. The open spaces, nice and bright and light. I think that's something that a lot of people would probably like to see in their homes. The L stands for low maintenance. Once you have a PassiveSolar design put in, there's really nothing there that's going to break down mechanically. You might lose windows and maybe have to replace that, but other than that, very little maintenance is required there. The U stands for unwavering comfort. You don't have the whir of machinery. You get nice even heat from it. And the E stands for environmentally friendly. Very green technology. You're going to be saving all kinds of energy as far as fossil fuels and that sort of thing whenever you have PassiveSolar design. So this is definitely a good acronym, I think, for that. Okay, we're going to compare passive versus active with this slide. A passive system has absolutely no equipment, no fans, no motors, nothing to be pumped or anything like that. Whereas an active system, you're going to have, and we'll get into that a little bit later on today with the other technologies we're going to be presenting. The technologies that you're going to be seeing on this PowerPoint are strictly going to be passive, so there's no mechanical parts needed for any of this. And it's not a new technology either. As you can see here, people have been using this for centuries. The cliff dwellers in the Chaco Canyon took advantage of the natural design of the canyon and built their dwellings among the cliffs there so they could take advantage of the fact that the sun would come in at a higher angle in the summer and be shaded to cut down on the heat, and a lower angle in the wintertime to heat the thing up. And so it definitely worked out. And of course, Eskimos took advantage of those kind of technologies, building igloos and so forth. So definitely nothing new that people have been using for quite a few years. There's 5 elements of PassiveSolar design, which we're going to be getting into these in a little bit more detail. Aperture is just a fancy word for the windows. The control is just the overhang or awnings and window shades and that sort of thing, but usually it's just the overhang. You have your absorber, which is the surface that the sunlight is going to hit as it comes through the aperture or through the window. Usually some have a dark surface to absorb the heat a little bit better. And then you have a thermal mass underneath there to absorb the heat, to distribute it for later use, and the distribution, which just takes advantage of radiation, convection, and conduction, the 3 ways that heat could be transferred. Mostly convection, but all 3 of them are coming into play here. Okay, there's 3 different kinds of solar thermal design concepts. There's what they call a direct gain, an isolated gain, and an indirect gain. And it's really pretty simple to figure out which one is which. Direct is exactly what it says. You're directly getting the gain from the sunlight, where the sunlight just simply comes through the window or through the glass, through your aperture, hits the absorber and the thermal mass and heats up, and you're heating up the room directly. If you have what they call an isolated gain, the isolated means you have it separated from the rest of the house. It's sort of like a sun porch or something like that you might have, that you can either use it whenever you need it or close it off whenever it's not needed. That's what they call an isolated gain. And then the indirect gain is what they call a thermal wall or a trom wall, which we're going to be looking in a little bit more detail later on, where you're going to be absorbing the heat for distribution at a later time. And all three of these technologies work. If you look down there at the bottom, that's probably the most important part of this slide right here. Buildings need to be as energy efficient as possible for passive solar energy to work. You need to have them very well insulated, and you have to have windows that are going to cut down on heat loss. But there's really no right or wrong answer and no right or wrong design. It all depends on what your latitude happens to be, what your needs happen to be, and these things can change. And we're going to go into all these bullets are going to be addressed a little bit later on, so I'm not going to go through each one of them right now, but we will be taking into each one of these individually as we go through. The building orientation is extremely important. It needs to be an east-west facing building with the longest wall facing south for obvious reasons, because the sun, even though it rises pretty much in the east and sets in the west, spends most of its time, at least at our latitudes, in the southern part of the sky. So you want to try to take advantage of that. And so you want to have your living areas on the southern side of the house, and closets, garages, and so forth need to be on the northern side, where you're not going to need as much heat and act as a buffer. Now, obviously, this is something to take into consideration on new construction. You're not going to be able to go out and change the orientation of your house if you're planning on trying to implement this idea. You can't just go out and tilt your house a different direction. So this is just something that has to be taken into consideration with new construction. Getting back to some more astronomy, even with my senior high astronomy elective, you ask the students, where does the sun rise and where does it set? And they'll obviously say it's going to rise in the east and set in the west, which is not completely true, as most of you are probably aware. There's only 2 days a year that actually happens. That's the vernal equinox and the autumnal equinox. It's going to rise in the east and set in the west. In the wintertime, as you can see from the diagram, it actually is going to rise a good bit south of the east and stay very low in the southern sky and set south of west. But in the summertime, as we're approaching right now, it rises north of east and travels fairly high up into the sky and then sets north of west. And that can vary at our latitude by pretty close to 25 degrees off of true east and true west. And the further north you go, like if you're up into Canada and so forth, it would even be more dramatic, and of course less dramatic as you go further south. So it changes with your latitude as well. And even in my astronomy elective class, we spent about 3 weeks just on the motions of the sun. And hopefully the students that I have kind of get the idea that there's an awful lot of variation on latitude and so forth. But yeah, it really does depend on where you're at. You have to take that into consideration. Roof overhangs are extremely important as well. They kind of act sort of like the brim of a baseball hat. Whenever the sun is up high, that small brim casts that long shadow down over top your body and really shades your face off a good bit. You want to have that in the summertime. You want to be able to have when the summer sun is high up in the sky, you want to have that shaded, because the problem with a lot of your passive solar technologies, if you have all that window opening there, it could get extremely hot inside your home, and you want to cut down on the heat, so it acts as a control doing that. But at the same time, when the sun's coming in at a lower angle in the wintertime, you want that sunlight to be coming in, and so the roof overhangs are extremely important as well. And they can be built right into the design of the house. It doesn't have to be anything kind of modernistic looking. It can simply be just the regular shading that you would get from a porch designed into a home, as you can see from these houses right here. Okay, the windows are extremely important. They need to be oriented, again, within probably... true south is a good idea, and it has to be not magnetic south, but true south. And there sometimes is a difference between that, so you got to check for your particular location where that is actually at. But if you're within 30 degrees of true south, it still does offer a good bit of solar contribution. And And again, there's no one right answer. You got to think about what it is you need to be doing. That last thing about the solar heat gain coefficient, that's a number that you can get for your windows. If you live north, you might want windows that have a high solar heat gain coefficient because you want to try to maximize that winter heat. But if you live somewhere further south, you might want with a lower value because you don't want to have as much of that heat coming in the summertime. So you need to take into all these things into consideration. It's not just one right answer or one thing that works for everything. You have to kind of consider what it is that your needs are and where you happen to live in order to decide what kind of technology is going to work best for you. Window treatments, definitely something you need to consider. Having shutters on the window, curtains, blinds can certainly allow the light in when you need it and cut the light out when you don't. I think that kind of like that cartoon. I always think of when I see that cartoon, think of my mother's cat. She had two cats. She had a Russian blue or gray, I forget what, Russian gray, and she had a Siamese. And it was kind of interesting to go over her house in the wintertime on a sunny day in the winter. The one cat, the Russian gray, was always laying in the sun on the carpet whenever you walked in the house on a nice day like that. And then she also had a slate floor right next to the doorway, and the Siamese would be laying on that on the same day. So the one cat wanted to be cool because obviously the heat was leaving the body onto the slate there, and the other cat wanted to be in the heat. So it was kind of interesting to see the difference between the two of them. But certainly those things are important. Now the one point right there might be kind of puzzling to some of you. It says awnings can reduce solar heat gain up to 65% on south-facing windows and 77% on west-facing windows. And you might be wondering, wouldn't that be also true of the east? The reason why they're talking about being on the west-facing windows, if you go back a couple slides here to this, the orientation of the house, they actually sometimes recommend for latitudes around here to maybe have your house tilted maybe a little bit this way instead, because that way you're going to maximize that low eastern sun in the wintertime and minimize the high western sun in the summertime in our latitudes. So therefore, having awnings on the western side of the west-facing windows is going to cut down on your heat gain a lot more than having them on the east-facing ones, if that makes sense to everybody. So sometimes having getting back to that whole idea that your alignment and all these different things are not necessarily one idea fits all. The idea that you can tilt, you can be off, you don't have to be exactly facing east and west. And sometimes, especially in our latitudes, having a slight tilt in that direction is going to maybe be an advantage in some cases for you. Anybody ever been to San Francisco before? A couple of you are nodding your heads there. Okay. I had the pleasure of spending 2 different summers in Berkeley. I went to 2 different National Science Foundation workshops at the University of California, Berkeley, and we spent a lot of time in San Francisco. Every chance we had, when classes were over, we'd hop on the BART and head over to San Francisco to spend some time. And both those summers were late July, early August was when I was there. And I don't know whether everybody remembers that Mark Twain once said that he never saw a winter as cold as a summer in San Francisco. Anybody ever remember hearing that quote? And it really is kind of true. If you've never been there before at that time of the year, a typical late July, early August day in San Francisco is very similar to at least Memorial Day was back in Altoona, which is where I live. I think we hit mid-60s or something like that for a high. It was a beautiful, clear blue sky. And that's what it's like in the summertime during the day. But then at night, it drops way down, get the radiation cooling taking place, and a lot of times the temperatures will go down to the upper 40s, maybe even, or lower 40s or upper 30s at nighttime. It's a great place for solar thermal technologies, for the passive solar like this. And there's a lot of buildings, for example, this one right here, where they take advantage of that the sunlight's going to come in. But the problem is it gets way too hot if you, day after day after day. So what they'll do is the part of the system of the building automatically opens up the windows for what they call a night flush, and you cool down that absorber that you have underneath the thermal mass underneath the absorber. You cool that down during the nighttime with that nice cool air that you have in San Francisco, and then the windows automatically close back up and it starts heating back up again for the next day. And so you use that to keep the building's relatively even temperature. Not necessarily something that's going to work in your home, although the same ideas can be practiced at least to some degree. Just opening the windows at night instead of turning on an air conditioner and so forth certainly can work. But this definitely works. Obviously, storing the energy is one of the biggest problems you have with passive solar. There's a couple different things can be used. Water is actually the best absorber material that they have. You can have water tanks incorporated into the design of your structure. But the problem with putting water in there is the tanks can leak. The water can end up getting algae in it and bacteria and things of that nature and need to be changed or cleaned from time to time. So that certainly can be a concern. But masonry of all different types, stones and things, are also fairly good absorbers as well, fairly good thermal masses as well. And it can be incorporated a lot easier into your landscaping or into the structure of your design of your building. So most people go with that, although water is twice as absorbent per volume or per area. And this is some examples that have been incorporated already where you can see the different incorporations of the thermal mass in passive solar designs. Chart just comparing it for you there, give you an idea of the weight to store 100 BTUs. You can notice there at the water, the weight of the water is substantially less as far as compared to the stone or the concrete or the other materials that you could be using. But again, it's got the other problems that we already talked about. Okay, indirect gain, which we saw back in one of the earlier slides. This is the Trom wall. Rhymes with the word Trom, and that's the gentleman's last name was Trom that came up with it. Anybody ever been here, by the way? You have? Okay, we've had a couple workshops in a row now that we've had somebody that's actually been to this building and has seen firsthand what we're talking about. But the whole idea of a Trom wall is it absorbs the heat during the day and then releases it slowly as the day goes on. And starting with the top there, you've got the same type of thing where you have your overhang there as a control. There's a daylighting, so it lets the light in, so you don't have to have as much artificial light. And also the visitors that are inside, it's at a level where at least adults can look out and see outside through the windows there. Then you've got a glass glazing there, which allows the light through, a little bit of an air gap. It's very well insulated down here at the bottom. And then behind the whole thing, you've got an 8-inch grout-filled CMU wall. It's concrete masonry unit is what that stands for. Or it's a combination of masonry and concrete mixed together there. And it's got projections sticking out the back of it to kind of help you distribute the heat a little bit more evenly. Plus it also inhibits people from putting displays up and blocking the inside wall, because that's really your heat source is the inside wall, so you don't want to have posters and things hanging up there to keep things away from that. And the way it works basically, heat that's absorbed at 12 o'clock noon takes as much as 8 hours to 10 hours to radiate through that wall into the room. So they're getting heat from the sun at 8 p.m. that actually was absorbed by the wall at noon. Okay, landscaping is extremely important as well. It's always a good idea, at least in our latitude, to have deciduous trees, especially on the southwest side. Again, because the deciduous trees are going to have the leaves on them in the summertime. They'll be blocking out that sunlight in the late summer afternoons to cut down on your heat coming into the house at that time of the year. But then, of course, in the wintertime, when you want that extra heat, the leaves are gone, the sunlight's coming through, and you're still going to be able to get that solar gain from that. And that's somewhat true as well as the southern side of the house as well. Some other ideas would be trellises. around the house. You can see like in through there. Again, the same concept. The leaves are going to be there in the summertime, cooling it down. Plus, you've got all those leaves in that trellis. All that evapotranspiration taking place, which is going to really lower the temperature in through that area as well, in addition to what it would be. And of course, if you have windows on that side, it's going to really have a great cooling effect on the whole side of the house over there. And then, of course, in the wintertime, the leaves will be pretty well gone. The sunlight's still going to be coming through. And trees, definitely an advantage in addition. Green curtains. This is another idea that was actually developed pretty much in Japan, where you can either have your plants growing on the outside of your windows or on the inside of your windows, either one, and acting sort of as a shade, natural shade there. And again, the transpiration going to be cutting down on the heat coming through. And the summertime, and in the wintertime, of course, the leaves won't be there. And they've even taken it one step further. They have, in some places in Japan, they've been growing different types of crops, different types of things like Goya and peas and cucumbers and things that grow in there. And the cafeterias of these buildings have been harvesting the crops and using them, incorporating them as part of their meal plans as well. Okay, some of you are probably thinking, okay, these kind of technologies might work very well down south, but locally, PassiveSolar maybe isn't such a great idea. This is the Phipps Center for Sustainable Landscapes over in Pittsburgh, which some of you may have ever been there before. Obviously, the Pittsburgh people have been. All this information down there, you're looking there about the LEED Platinum and site certification and so forth. You can see on there, you can get on the web pages and find out what that's all about, or get on to Phipps and it has more information about it as well. But to make a long story short, this is a way of saying this is a fantastically green building. It has one of the highest certifications you can get as far as the greenness of the technologies that are in use there. So you can research this stuff a little bit further on your own if you are interested in finding out all the different things that they have. They started with the idea of outside-in passive first strategy. Outside-in means you're working with the landscaping first. The whole idea, if you take a look there, the deciduous trees planted mainly on the southern side of the building, coniferous trees acting as a wind block up on the northern end, which they're going to be green all year round and act as a wind block to aid in the heating and cooling of the building. Make sure the parking lot isn't right next up to the building, where you have, if you have grassy areas next to your property, it's going to help out with your cooling in the summertime as well. So those are all things. The orientation of the building has been maximized. All those different things you can read on your own that have all been done to maximize the amount of heat coming in and the sunlight coming in the wintertime, and try to minimize it as much as possible in the summertime. All these things were taken into consideration in the whole design and setup of the building. And this atrium right here is pretty much 100% passively cooled, where they take advantage of the natural airflow to cool the building as much as possible. And of course, just rehashing a lot of things we've already talked about, you need to have the extremely well insulated. The windows have to be the right type as far as letting the light in and keeping the heat trapped in. Very good insulation the whole way around, maximizing the daylighting and so forth. So all these things are taken into consideration in the design of this building. Another place that you can take a little bit closer look at if you get on and watch that video right there that's listed, kind of interesting video. And if you do watch that video, Ron Celentano is featured very prominently on there, so you can at least put the face with the name there that when you're seeing the PowerPoints here today. But in this Stargazer's Winery, basically they take it's an isolated gain. They have like a sunroom down below there, and the heat heats up the room, and there's some vents up near the ceiling, and I'm not sure whether we can see them or not, or whether that's the vents up there, but the heat comes up, rises, and goes through the vents into the rest of the building. And then there's, it just uses passive air circulation, the fact that heat's going to rise by convection and the cold air is going to sink to come back down into the area to be reheated again. And it definitely is a very good example of an isolated gain that we saw back in one of the earlier slides near the beginning of the program. And this gives you an idea that this kind of technology can work very well in these kind of latitudes. This is a house over in Pittsburgh that's for sale. It's 100% or pretty close to 100% passively heated. I guess it said 80%, less than traditional home. And you can get most of your heating done if you design the building right with all the things we took into consideration a little bit earlier. And it's really something that isn't completely 100% new for latitudes around here either. Ever since the late 70s, I live in Altoona, and I had to go up to Glendale, which I had to pass over the mountain every day. And if anybody's familiar with the Altoona area, just about a half a mile above the Penn State Altoona campus on the Juniata Gap Road, there is a house that was built there back in the late 70s. It's 100% passively solar heated. And I had an opportunity here just a couple weeks ago to talk to the gentleman who lives in the house. And he really didn't know a whole lot about it. He said, well, you have to talk to my ex-wife. She's the one that actually did most of the designing and everything for it. So I talked to her, and she said, well, of course, the thing was very well insulated, and they have it slightly tilted, so it's not exactly north-south, or east-west, I'm sorry. They have it tilted just a little bit so they can take advantage of the extra morning sun in the wintertime and try to cut out some in the winter or the summertime as well. So that tilt that I showed you is what they used on that house. The one problem that they have in that house is that the neighbors have let some trees grow up, and they're now having some problem with some shading because of the neighbors allowing trees to grow a little bit taller, which is something they can't control at all. But she said that her ex-husband, is just using a little electric cube to supplement the heat in there. And most of the time, he doesn't even need to use it still, even despite the fact that there is a good bit of shading. They do have a fireplace in the house, but they put the fireplace in just because they wanted a fireplace and not because they actually use it. He does use it to supplement his heat because he likes to have a fire on occasion. But these kind of technologies do work within pretty good reason, even in our latitudes. Okay. For years, we've been damming water and digging for coal and drilling for oil and natural gas and so forth, which are really, as Tice pointed out earlier, all forms of sunlight that's been stored for us. Why not cut out the middleman? Why not go back to the source and get our energy directly from the sun and solar thermal? Thank you.